Hip-hop was built from a spirit of independence, and even though the culture evolved into the mainstream, it's the independent underground that has stayed the heart and soul of the culture. There are many artists who embraced their independence and became legends through it, but no rapper has embodied what it means to be independent more than LP. From the earliest days of his career with his group Company Flow, he has branded himself independent as fuck. And through running one of the most important independent rap labels, and even brushing up against the mainstream with his time with Run the Jewels, he has always kept the spirit of independence to guide him to disrupt the industry. El Producto was born and raised in the heart of hip-hop, New York City. He grew up idolizing hip-hop groups like Run DMC and Public Enemy, knowing early on that he wanted to follow in their footsteps. He started out making pause tapes and writing raps by the age of 10. By the time he was a sophomore in high school, he was kicked out of school and already pursuing a career as a musician. With the guidance of his mom, who encouraged him to follow his dreams, he went to musical engineering school at the Center for Media Arts in Manhattan. He had already self-taught himself how to master the Casio SK1, then a 4-track. But at this school he was able to learn how to engineer and mix. And while he was there, he linked up with some fellow students who were running their own small indie label at the time. Through them he released a single, and all seemed well. But after a small disagreement, the people running that label tried to strong-arm him into never releasing anything ever again. He was still a minor when he signed with them, so he was able to get out of the contract with some legal help. But this experience put a bad taste in his already cynical mouth, giving him a healthy disdain for the business side of the industry. You see, LP has always been guided by the music and the music alone. The business side of things came second. This came back to bite him at a few points of his career, but his instincts in following his ear and his heart made him a singular talent that was always on the cutting edge of what hip-hop had to offer. He always had dreams of being a part of a group, since he grew up idolizing acts like Run DMC. He came up with the name Company Flow just as something cool that he wanted to be a part of, but he had no crew to join him. He met Big Just and Mr. Len just as he was getting out of his last label situation. The three of them immediately hit it off. They were really three weirdos with unique minds and immense amounts of talent. When El asked them to be a part of Company Flow, they said yeah and got to start on their first project, Fun Crusher. LP worked at Tower Records at the time and would use the money he earned there to pay for his studio time. This record was completely independent, distributing it right from their kitchen table, and it was a huge hit, much to the surprise of the industry. It really was one of the first huge success stories for an independent hip-hop act from both a critical and a monetary perspective, so much that it started a bidding war between many bigger labels who wanted to sign them. They ended up signing to Rawkus Records, a newer label who was looking for their identity, and more importantly, told the group they had full creative control over the art without any label interference. Coflow took their EP and developed it further to become their debut full-length album, Fun Crusher Plus. This is one of the definitive underground records of the mid-90s. LP's production was spacey and experimental, while being based in breaks and samples, like the hip-hop he loved growing up. He would sample sounds and noises that weren't music, to give each song a feeling like it came from another world, and the lyrics were assembled in abstract absurdity. LP and Just would try to one-up each other, saying the most outrageous things on each song. One of the final songs recorded for the album was Last Good Sleep, which would be an indication for the type of music that LP would go on to make in his solo career. The song is a brutally personal and honest recounting of a memory of his stepdad beating his mom when he was a child. He channels the helplessness of his younger self and embraces his raw memories. It's incredibly powerful, and a great example of why so many people are able to connect with him as an artist. Company Flow's second record, Little Johnny from the Hospital, was completely instrumental, and while it showcased his evolving skill as one of the genre's best producers, Rawkus wasn't quite sure how to market it, so they dropped the group. Just left the group around this time due to some creative and personal differences, and before they knew it, Company Flow was no more. At this point, LP was lost. He didn't want to be a solo artist. He was waiting his whole life to be a part of a rap group like Company Flow, and now that it was gone, he didn't know what to do. He had been burned by the industry twice already, so one thing that he did know was that he wanted to answer to no one other than himself. There was a scene going on in the underground that was rich with talent, and he wanted to capture that and put some structure behind it to get the music out there. He started Def Jux with his friend Amici, and the label would quickly become one of the most important hip-hop labels of the 2000s. He handpicked Vortal Mega and Vast Air as two MCs he wanted to work with, and they became Cannibal Ox. LP entirely produced their first album, The Cold Vein, a record that to this day is praised for its groundbreaking sound. His production on this record was inspired by the sci-fi movies that he grew up with, pulling from the past to create sounds of the future. Every artist involved with Def Jux had their own definitive style and sound. He was able to rally behind people who created their own lane, boosting them up to unlock the best of their abilities. But in this stage of his career, he knew that he didn't want to just be behind the scenes. He had a lot more to say. His solo work would be equally as boundary pushing as the stuff he worked on before, but with a much more personal touch that he could really throw his all into. His first solo album, Fantastic Damage, was released in 2002. This album is a behemoth, a surrealist look at himself and the world collapsing around him. At 70 minutes long, this is the first time of his career that LP was able to give us his raw, unfiltered, and uncut artistry. Many have called this album a post-9/11 work, and even though most of it was recorded before the attacks, the record captures that feeling of disgust and distrust that the world was feeling in its aftermath. It feels dystopian in a way, with production inspired by the Bomb Squad, but taken to the future, where their bombs could be disarmed and reconstructed as something new. By this point, LP was not only an icon of indie hip-hop, but also straight up one of the most important voices in independent music, to the point that other genres wanted his touch on what they were doing too. In 2004, he produced a jazz album for a group called the Blue Series Continuum. The group was comprised of some incredibly talented jazz musicians who had become geniuses of improvisation over decades. LP was able to provide structure to their otherwise free styles, while also deconstructing them in a new way from the mind of a hip-hop producer. This album is also important in chronicling his destiny as a musician, as he was able to work with his father on one of these songs. His father was a jazz pianist his whole life, playing under the name Harry Keys. Even in a side project like this, where LP is producing for a group of people he doesn't even know too well, he's able to insert that personal touch to this record by digging into his familial history through jazz. One thing about LP is that he's always evolving. His style always maintains a few core elements, but with every record, he matures both as a writer and as a producer. His second solo album, I'll Sleep When You're Dead, released in March of 2007. This is his favorite of his own records, and it's easy to see why. This album is shorter and more focused than anything he had released up until that point. Every word on this album has a purpose, with LP challenging himself to write story tracks and keep to specific themes throughout the album. It deals directly with war, politics, drugs, and self-reflection, all with the most thoughtful and purposeful pen of his career. The production is more rock-inspired, with him describing it as a psychedelic Boogie Down Productions record, like if Scott LaRock and Ced G took acid. By this point, LP was at the top of the independent hip-hop world. He had dominated esoteric and soul in a couple of backpacker beefs. He was a member of the Weathermen, a supergroup consisting of bar for bar some of the most talented MCs ever, and he was the head of a label that was defining underground hip-hop at the time. But unfortunately, the tides would turn for him around the turn of the decade. Def Jux had a great run, but as the music industry was changing, their time was coming to a close. Through the many years of the label, LP only gave himself a salary one of those years. It was never about the money for him, just about highlighting the music. But as downloads and streaming surpassed physical album sales, independent labels like Def Jux struggled to stay afloat, and the label closed its doors officially in 2010. LP's friend and frequent collaborator, Camu Teo, was the heart of the Weathermen, and someone who was constantly inspiring LP to be his best. The duo also was a part of a group called Central Services, with one EP released called Forever Frozen in Television Time. Camu Teo passed away after a 2-year battle with lung cancer. LP was distraught and lost after this. He felt it was his mission to finish Camus' last album, King of Hearts, which was finally released in 2010. LP gave his all into making sure this record came out as close to how Camus would have wanted. But with all that he gave to this record, he now was lost once again with no label, no crew, and no idea where to go musically. After a couple years of escapism through drugs and alcohol, he finally found his next album within the darkness that was surrounding his life at the time. He released Cancer for Cure in May of 2012. Although the loss of his friend to cancer affected his mind state, the album isn't necessarily about his specific battle with cancer. The name more so came from the darkness that was following him at the time. He had lost everything in that moment. He felt like he was a cancer to everything good in his life. He even would be cancer to a cure. LP has always been a very personal writer, going back to his company Flow days. But on this album, he took it to a new level. He gets deep about his struggles with addiction and confronts his darkness head on. This album is heavy and feels like LP coming to the end of his rope. And luckily, this would be the end for him, but a new beginning was forming at the same time. While he was working on Cancer for Cure, he linked up with another rap veteran, Killer Mike. On the surface, these two don't look like they have much in common. LP was from New York, Mike was from the South. LP made experimental East Coast backpack rap, while Mike was best known as a feature on a few Outkast hits. But when they got together, their similarities became more clear. They were two artists who had been overlooked by the industry. Raised by the political, groundbreaking rap of the 80s, they each found success, but never to the point where they ever felt fully understood by the industry. And now, at the start of a new decade, they each were a bit lost, hoping to find a new place to live within modern-day hip-hop. LP produced the entirety of Mike's 2012 album, Rap Music, which coincidentally was released just a week before Cancer for Cure. That 1 week in 2012 symbolized the end of one era of LP's career and the start of another. LP was able to bring out a side of Killer Mike that unleashed his full potential as an MC, and working with Killer Mike let LP embrace a slightly different sound of hip-hop than he was used to. It was the perfect partnership. LP grew up idolizing groups like Run DMC, and he always wanted to replicate that energy. He thought he had it with Company Flow, then again with the Weathermen, but now he had finally found his partner. After the success of Rap Music, the two decided to form the group Run the Jewels. The name was inspired by the LL Cool J song Cheesy Rat Blues, a song about a guy who made it to the top and then lost everything, and then at the end of the song they say, "Run the Jewels." This song was symbolic of where they both were in their careers, at a point where they had lost everything, so they had nothing else to do but to start something new. They went up to a secluded studio in upstate New York, smoked some weed, and took some shrooms. Then after a few weeks they had most of their first record done. They decided to give this album to their fans for free. This was sort of an investment in their independence. The duo was thanking fans for being with them at their lowest, and allowing them to take the journey with Run the Jewels to the top. The album was exciting, with each artist bringing their own flair to the record, but the sum of their skills equaled something much greater than they could make on their own. At its core, this was a fun, hype record, but as they got to work on its sequel, they knew that they had more to say with this one. They were able to keep the same energy as they had on the first, but this one being more focused and purposeful with their lyrics, harkening back to their influences in political revolution rap like Public Enemy. This one was recorded a bit in the same upstate New York studio, but also a bit in Atlanta, and some in the Brain Feeder studio and the Alchemist studio in LA. So the record had a bigger and more wide appealing sound. They released this one under Mass Appeal, keeping their underground energy, but with some bigger backing, and the result was a huge jump in popularity for them. When you look at their discography, you may be confused with a record called Meow the Jewels. This is a remix album that is made entirely of cat noises. This may seem like a joke, and even though it did start out that way, the duo was able to use this album to really make a difference. They used this album to raise money for the families of Eric Garner and Michael Brown, two victims of police brutality. It's one thing for rappers to use their socially conscious lyrics to get a point across, but LP and Killer Mike were able to use their new level of popularity to really make a difference in the world. Run the Jewels 3 was their most overtly political record, influenced by the unrest in America at the time. This record is their biggest and most dense, but it's also their most introspective. There is a lot of sadness in this one, but you can also feel them trying to find something beautiful in a tough time. The first two Run the Jewels records were released for free, but through labels, Fool's Gold and Mass Appeal. But this one was released completely independently. Run the Jewels 4 came out in early COVID, and felt like the duo moving out of the darkness of their last record and making something much more fun and hopeful. From a production standpoint, LP's sampling is a departure from everything that he had become known for. He sampled some well-known songs and a lot of upbeat music, really giving this a brand new feel, while still maintaining that same energy and attitude. What I love about Run the Jewels is they don't stay the same with every album, but they also don't reinvent themselves. They evolve. You can even chart their evolution on the album covers of each record. The hands on the first album were zombified, because at that point in their careers, they were considered dead, looking for new life. On Run the Jewels 2, they were now bandaged, headed in the direction of healing and adapting to their new life as musicians. On Run the Jewels 3, the hands become gold because they had reached not only their purest form, but their true elemental selves. There was no frills on this album. It was just who they were at their most raw. And then on Run the Jewels 4, the hands are abstract and polygonal, making the way for the future, not only for themselves, but the world, with this as its soundtrack. LP has had one of the most full careers that you could ask for. He has been at the top, he has been at the bottom, he has been a part of legendary groups, and he's also been a solo success. And best of all, he did most of it independently. Indie hip-hop is a powerful culture, because hip-hop at its core is all about independence. The mainstream may vary in quality and popularity, but on the independent side of things, the music always remains the key to everything. Today, I think independent hip-hop is in a truly great place, and much of that has to do with LP and how he navigated his career through the years. He had brushes with labels at times, but at his core, LP will always be independent as fuck. Thank you for watching, everybody. Let me know down in the comments what is your favorite LP song and what is your favorite LP album. I feel like LP is one of the titans of underground hip-hop that I had not yet made a video on, so I'm glad to finally have dug into his full career like this. We have a brand new year coming up, so let me know down in the comments also who are some other artists you want to see me cover in 2025. Every month I have a vote over on my Patreon for who I should cover next. I also want to shout out Def Magazine, which is the independent magazine that I run and write for with the help of many talented designers, writers, and artists from around the world. We just dropped our 5th issue featuring our cover artist Uncle John and a bunch of super dope interviews, album reviews, opinion pieces, and much more. You can check out all of the issues of Def Magazine over at staydef.com. And as always, I got a lot more headed your way, so stay tuned, stay safe, and stay def. Thanks for watching.